I'll be joined by Ambassador Kwabena Osei-Dankwa. Good morning. He's Special Advisor to the Foreign Affairs Minister. Ambassador, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. And then Dr. Alexandra Vutraves. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
You're doing absolutely fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. He's joining us from the Global Studies Institute, University of Geneva. He's the editor-in-chief of the Revue Militaire Suisse. I will begin the conversation, though, from Ambassador Kwabena Osei-Dankwa, who advises the Foreign Affairs Minister, just so that we can catch an update. So, Ambassador, let's catch up on a couple of things. Ghana set out a plan to return as many of its citizens who wanted to return as possible. How many have you been able to get to Ghana so far?
Well, I believe at the top of the show, you mentioned the last number of our nationals who returned to Ghana. I think the important number is actually the numbers who have moved out of Ukraine into the countries that we had arranged with to receive them, including Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Moldova, and also Czech Republic, because we moved the nationals who arrived in Slovakia to the Czech Republic. And in addition, I think a very important development is the announcement by the Russian government to move foreign students from Sumy into Russia, and in the case of some countries, to Sweden. As you will recall, at the beginning of the operations, we had called on the two sides to initiate a humanitarian pause. And now we do have the humanitarian corridor. And so our nationals who were essentially stuck and unable to move out are now in the position of being taken out of harm's way. So that is the picture as we speak. I think we're in a position to see that we will be able to move all our nationals from Ukraine from harm's way.
Just to be clear, the focus has been on students. Are they the ones in the majority, or you are looking to also move regular migrants, Ghanaians who had perhaps been living and working in Ukraine for years and were not there to study, to other parts, to other countries, as you've mentioned? Or this is
right.
Purely a student-based operation?
I was very careful in saying nationals because we're concerned about the safety and security of all Ghanaians in Ukraine. So that has been the focus, to move. Of course, the majority of them are university students, and but we are moving out all Ghanaian nationals who desire to leave, just as, of course, civilians in Ukraine are also moving into Poland and other places.
And what kind of assistance is being offered to these students as they try and settle in these countries that you've moved them to, albeit temporarily?
Right. The objective is not for them to settle. So usually when you arrive at the border points, if you do not have a passport, then it is the responsibility of our officials at those border points to ensure that you have a travel certificate. Without that, you cannot enter into another country. So that is the first step. The other step, of course, is that at those reception centers, our officials are then able to move those nationals to the various capitals where arrangements are then made for flights out of those countries. Now, as I said at the beginning, for instance, we have our nationals being moved from the Slovak Republic once they arrive there to Prague, where our embassy is. So we are able to offer more facilities. So we provide accommodation and food, and then, the tickets with which people can travel. Now, in the case of those who, for whom tickets are purchased and who then do not take advantage of them, obviously they are either settling in or moving to other countries in Europe. And we are not focused on that at the moment, because every minute counts, and we have to focus on those who are willing to return home once they are out of Ukraine.
Let's talk about Ghana's position on the conflict itself, which culminated in its very strongly worded statement initially when this started, and then also in its strong vote at the United Nations. What is informing Ghana's position on this? Because we have seen other African countries some have abstained. We had Eritrea, of course, who voted based on their own foreign policy strategy. What are we looking at as Ghana?
Right. First of all, I have to say that, Ghana enjoys friendly relations with all the member states of the United Nations. We have very strong relations with Russia, with Ukraine, with every member state. And so we go into this from that perspective. From the beginning, we had called on the Russian Federation to, seek to address its concerns, which they had articulated through peaceful means, through dialogue. And we supported all the processes, including the Normandy process, which brought together, in addition to France and Germany, Ukraine and Russia.
We seem to have a small hitch with Ambassador Osei Danquah's connection. We'll try and get back to him. He was just updating us on the Ghana position. He's the special advisor to the foreign minister. Well, we have him back. Ambassador, please continue.
And then also at the level of foreign minister. So we were very supportive of that. What we did in the Security Council was to, because the Russian Federation had assured the international community that they had no intention to attack Ukraine, we had supported a resolution to have an open debate in the Security Council to ensure that, there were no unanticipated accidents that might lead to war. And that debate took place. Now, once the Russian Federation decided to recognize the two so-called breakaway regions, then Ghana criticized the move because we also believe in the principles and values of the United Nations Charter. And as you know, the Charter guarantees the territorial integrity, the political independence of all member states, and it calls for the resolution of disputes by peaceful means. The sovereign equality of states is a fundamental aspect of the Charter. Now, the Charter, as we keep saying, is the insurance policy for small states. So imagine that a state like Ghana has the same value, importance, and rights as the biggest state in the United Nations. That has served the world very well. And we truly believe that from the position of principle, but also in terms of our own national interest, all member states should respect the charter. Every decision, every action that undermines the credibility of the United Nations and its charter is a danger to all of us as member states, and also to the ability of the United Nations to contribute to our sustainable development goals. So that is the perspective from which Ghana has made these decisions in all the meetings, including the emergency special session of the General Assembly, which had the votes that you just referred to.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kwabena Said. I'll come back to you in a bit. Let me talk to Dr. Alexander Vutravers, who is our security expert. We've had this invasion, yes, that is what it is, for almost 10 days now. From the European perspective and also from the security perspective, what have the Russians been doing with this mission in Ukraine? We've seen reports of shelling in certain places, a slowdown in a military convoy here, Ukrainian defenses. What exactly do you see happening militarily? What are they trying to do?
Okay, this is a very classic military assault move, combined arms. It's very much a textbook military operation, and if you look into history, you will definitely note that between 1941 and 1943, there were many military operations between the Soviet Union at the time and Nazi Germany that took place exactly in that part of the world, exactly in the same area. And so we see perhaps some links with what has happened in the past, but of course with one great difference, and that is technology. We've seen a lot of high-tech gear and technology being used. So to answer your question very simply, the Russian attack has had three main steps or three main sub-operations with three distinct objectives. The first operation is the operation that was led by two army corps of the Russian Federation, which went into the Republic of Donetsk and the Republic of Luhansk with the objective to support the separatist movements, the armed groups that were there, because they have been fighting a struggle for the past 8 or so years against Ukrainian armed forces. So this was one of the three moves. The second move is a much larger, more intensive, and very much similar to the Blitzkrieg of the Second World War. It was an armored, mechanized assault from the north in the direction of Kharkov, and from the south, from the Crimean Peninsula towards the north over the river Dnieper, which kind of separates Ukraine into two sets of territories or two land masses. And the objective of this concerted, synchronized, mechanized assault was really to encircle about a third of the forces of the army of Ukraine. This is also still underway. And then what most of the commentators and what most of the news have been reporting is a third attack, and I would say a separate military operation, which has been taking place since the very first hours of the conflict. And this has been an attack, a deliberate attack against the capital, Kiev. And this has taken various forms since the first day. On the first day, armed helicopters with transporting troops were intended to seize an airfield, an airport that was about 25 kilometers from the center of Kiev. This airborne assault failed miserably. 12 helicopters were shot down, and this was a great surprise to the Russian forces. And eventually, those forces that did land kept fighting for a little while, but then were eventually taken prisoner. Most of the very large cargo planes, which were supposed to transport all of the military equipment to sustain this bridgehead of the airborne forces, did not even take off because the airfield had not been secured. And so Russia has had no other choice than to drive towards Kiev by land. And so two mechanized brigades have been taking positions and moving across very difficult terrain along the river Dnieper. One of these two brigades has had to cross the compound of the nuclear power plant of Chernobyl. And of course, this has also slowed down the advance. These forces have essentially run out of fuel and have required supporting units, so other mechanized brigades, a second echelon to move forward, and this was the case on day 3 of the offensive. And now what we are seeing is a progressive encirclement of Kiev, not really a very strong push into the city, urban warfare such as we have seen in Grozny or in other places, but we are seeing a gradual encirclement of Kiev, which is, of course, the strategic objective. And then the operational objective is to take prisoner, to encircle most of the armed forces of Ukraine in the eastern part of the country.
Now, you talk about that objective, and one would ask, to what end in this day and age? You know, so they take Kiev and occupy Kiev?
I would say there's two objectives. There's always a minimum objective, so what the Russians will be satisfied with and eventually will have to negotiate. And there's always a maximum objective. The maximum objective clearly is to take over the entire country. And in the Russian mentality and the Russian doctrine, this means taking over the capital city of Kiev. The government is less important. Of course, it would be good if the president of Ukraine was captured or the regime was changed or moved. Vladimir Putin has been very explicit about these aims, but taking the capital city of Kiev is the strategic objective of Russian forces. And if that cannot be achieved, then at the minimum, a sizable proportion, about 1/3 of the Ukraine armed forces, need to be put out of commission. This is what Vladimir Putin has referred to as the demilitarization of Ukraine, because this will no longer allow Ukraine military forces to pose a threat on the secessionist republics that Russia aims to annex.
Just to help, what kind of shape is the Ukrainian army in prior to this? What would be their capability? And we hear a lot about the Russian army, of course, significant numbers. But what kind of tooling are we looking at?
Okay, it depends how much time you have in your show.
Because you can do this in 5 minutes.
In 5 minutes. Very briefly, there is not a single area in which Ukraine armed forces have any kind of superiority, either in numbers or in quality. Whether you are talking about tanks, whether you're talking about airplanes, Ukraine has to do with less and, let's say, not modernized equipment, whether we're talking about the Air Force, whether we're talking about infantry weapons or anything else. So there's not a miracle solution for Ukraine, except the old doctrine of making Russia pay very, very dearly for every meter of ground that they take. There is a military rule, a ratio. You need about 3 attackers in order to overtake a single defender, if you admit that both are using the same kind of weaponry. So you see the kind of military effort that Russia is going to need to undertake in order to be successful in its objectives. So far, it has not been very effective. The Ukrainian forces have resisted, I think, better than anybody could have predicted. At the same time, they're winning the opinion and the information warfare. At the same time, they are mobilizing their reserves because there is a National Guard that has been created about 4 or 5 years ago, and they are arming this National Guard in order to resist in the cities. And so they are going to make Russia pay very dearly for their excuse me to say, limited successes so far.
Now, let's talk about the diplomatic engagements that have been ongoing. And Dr. Thea Champon, just give me a few more minutes. I'll get you so that we look at the Ghana side in terms of impact. As the offensive is ongoing, Europe has also been talking. Can you explain to us what the European conversation, where it is headed right now, and what the pressure points could be? Because it does look like Vladimir Putin is very clear in his mind what he wants, and he seems prepared to suffer some level of punishment to get what he wants. Is Europe prepared to suffer along with him?
I'm not sure that Europe is prepared to suffer with Russia, but definitely I think in Europe, a continent which has been devastated twice by world wars and has been suffering and paying a lot of money during the Cold War for the main belligerents, for the two superpowers to have their policies taken seriously. I think there's a general opinion that an attack must not prevail. We're here in front of a clear violation of the United Nations Charter. I don't want to get into the discussion of who is right and who is wrong, because I am sure that everybody has done something wrong at one point or another, but that's not the point. The point is that a military attack on a smaller state like Ukraine is unwarranted, and that's a breach of Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. And this is something very important for Europeans, because like you said, the fact that Ghana is a small country, well, a lot of European countries are also small countries, and they are very worried when they hear boots and tanks and shells being fired and missiles being fired and new technologies and an arms race being launched. They're very aware and very afraid of this. And so what we are seeing is a rearmament effort pioneered by Germany, but other countries, Finland, Sweden, have also been rearming quite substantially. And we're seeing economic sanctions that are hurting Russia very dearly, not only coming from Europe, by the way, but Japan has announced economic sanctions that are also going to hit the military industrial complex in Russia. And of course, the uncertainty and the important variable that is going to make or break this union or this unity of nations against this armed aggression is going to be the position of China.
Why is China so important in this equation from the European perspective and also from the Russian perspective?
Let me answer you in two different ways. First of all, China has been completely marginalized in this conflict. And when I say marginalized, I mean, nobody has asked China what its position was with regards to this conflict. And we're seeing, in fact, a return to the political climate of the Cold War, East versus West, where China doesn't really have a role to play. Now, at the same time, China, the People's Republic of China, is in a bit of a difficult situation politically and diplomatically speaking, because even if China wanted to support Russia as an ally or wanted to keep Russia as an ally, and this is a hypothesis that I'm formulating, then it's going to be very difficult for China to do that, because traditionally the foreign policy of China has always been non-intervention, non-interference, and no aggression, no military intervention in foreign countries. So you see that China is in a difficult situation. It will probably intensify its economic ties with Russia, at least up to a certain point. But how much help can China really give Russia, and how much is China going to have to pay for this alliance? This is something that will remain, that we will need to keep following.
Interesting. I'll come back to you, Dr. Alexander Vutrava, security expert, himself a former military man, served 17 years, commanded tank companies and armored battalions. So he knows what he's talking about. But currently, he's at the Global Studies Institute of the University of Geneva. Let me talk to Theo. And Theo, you have been looking at the economic impact of this conflict. Somebody might, usually the Ghanaian will sit back and say, well, it's very far away. But such is the world these days. You can never be too far away from, you can be far away from the actual fighting, but we are fighting economically. And you have outlined several facets of our economy that will feel the impact or is feeling the impact of this conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your two other panelists, Alexander and Mr. Kwabena, have done a great job of articulating the geopolitical antecedents of the conflict. But the point really is that we are in a hyper-globalized world, and whatever happens in some distant place has an impact on a small open economy like Ghana. So the way I see it, directly you have about 3 channels through which we would see the impact of the conflict manifest. The first one is the price impact or the price channel, and this is to do with oil, which I would come to, and then also soft commodities like wheat and and other imports. The second channel is the social impact. So when you have the price impact, it's actually going to translate into elevated inflationary pressures domestically on an economy like Ghana. And then the third channel is actually sort of on the trade angle, where, again, when we look at the data, especially in terms of trade between Ghana and Russia and Ghana and Ukraine, is really not that big. We're not, both of them are not a top 20 trading nation of Ghana in that respect. So the emphasis of the impact really is going to be more on the price channel, and then secondly at the social level. And I want to sort of maybe just explain with the price, starting off with the oil.
Yes, go ahead.
And also with the soft commodity. So, I mean, Ghana is a net exporter of crude oil. We are doing around 180,000 barrels a day, and consuming internally just around 13,000 barrels of oil a day. And what this does is that anytime prices go up on the international market, then you expect to have a significant positive impact on the country's trade balance in that respect. But it gets a little bit tricky in the sense that although we're a net exporter, we still use a big chunk of our monies to import crude oil products into the country. So let me give you some numbers. As of 2021, we were spending around 3.8% of our GDP, or just about 2.7 billion on our oil import bill. And then oil exports cumulatively gave us around 3.9 billion in 2020. But actually only about 17%, in other words, just around $640 million came directly into the country. So your trade balance improves. However, you do have to spend more money importing crude oil products into the country And when you don't control the price on the international market, it means you still pretty much have to use the savings that you got from the higher price or higher increment in oil prices to buy more of these petroleum products into your country to meet your domestic needs. And that also then, in an environment where the local currency is already under pressure, it would push or elevate the inflation rate, and that further then means will have a dent or an impact on livelihoods. The second one on the soft commodities, again, is very similar in that respect. Both Russia and to an extent Belarus control almost about 40% of the global market for potash fertilizer, which we use for our agriculture products. And so with the imposition of sanctions, with some of the ports in the southern part of Ukraine being blocked off, and all these being severed, you are going to see an impact. And we're actually already seeing that with these commodity prices. So potash prices have gone up, and subsequently also wheat prices have also gone up. So Russia and Ukraine this time around, not Russia and Belarus, Russia and Ukraine control around 30% of the global market for wheat. And we are seeing that also impact already beginning to be felt across the world. If you look at the Ghana data, Ghana imports around 990,000 metric tons of wheat into the country. So roughly about 1 million metric tons of wheat. If you look at where that's coming from, about half of that comes from Canada, and then the remainder comes from Russia, France, and then the USA to an extent. So any of the price points or price pressures that we're seeing would mean that wheat prices go up, and domestically again in Ghana, the price goes up. And I am more worried, especially when you look at the consumption basket, right, in Ghana, especially for for example, like the wheat. Of that 1 million metric tons, 85% of that wheat that we import goes into making bread, and then the remaining 15% for like cakes and other pastries. And when you look at the inflation data by the statistical service, almost about 41% of household consumption expenditure in Ghana is coming from food and beverages. So on average, a typical household is spending about 40% or 40p out of every dollar or cedi on these. And then you also have some other effects on the transport, angle. So literally you're looking pretty much like a double whammy of that impact on an economy, like Ghana. So we might think that what is happening in Russia and Ukraine seems rather distant or far off, but actually for several of the economies, including Ghana, we are already seeing the impact or the effect of that. One of the ways to solve it domestically, which is long-term, I think, things like wheat, we can substitute the consumption of wheat with, with cassava flour, with yam flour, things like that, because these are like acquired taste anyway. But it forces or makes an imperative for countries like Ghana to start seriously thinking and addressing the issues of, import substitution and building your domestic energy needs or refining capacity, including even deploying, things like renewable energy.
You spoke about the oil, soft commodities, social impact, and then trade. On the matter of sanctions, if Russia is sanctioned, does that, and sanctions have been put in place, yes. How does that affect us doing business with Russia?
For sure. I mean, it will have some impact in terms of like, if you're a company and you need to make certain payments, now you don't have access to the SWIFT system. and so there's no means of, for example, bringing in goods from Russia into Ghana, things like that. But at an aggregate level, Ghana on the sanctions end actually wouldn't feel it that much, because I looked at the data, and what was quite clear is that Ghana-Russia trade relations, there is fairly negligible. It's actually the less than $100 or so million dollars, and they are not in any of our top 10 or even top 20 export or import nations. Something similar also with Ukraine. So I think the trade corridor or the trade impact for now is fairly negligible, and the biggest impact on the economy of Ghana would actually be through the price channel, oil, wheat, other soft commodities, and then the subsequent indirect effect of that in driving up, inflation and household consumption overall.
But the oil seems to be the most problematic, as we have come to discover.
Yeah, I mean, for now it's the oil one that we're seeing, and also it's because, like we discussed previously in the other session, domestically we haven't done enough to deepen our processing capacity, and so you're forced to go outside and bring these products into the country. Domestically, we're also not doing enough to eat more of what we grow on our own, and to create the value chain linkages, internally. And so that what all of these then force you is you are pretty much dependent on a lot of exports, where you have to spend hard currency to bring these goods and services into your country. And ultimately, whenever such external or exogenous shock, like we're seeing with the conflict, manifest in things like oil prices or other commodities, we're literally running helter-skelter because you don't have any shock absorbers whatsoever to mitigate the impact of that shock on your economy.
All right, thank you, Theo. Let me come back to Ambassador Kwabena Said Dankwa from the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and again, just settle back a bit. So, Ambassador, just to get back on the evacuation process and what we are trying to do, the strategy with the Ghanaian students, you did announce the corridor that has been created by Russia, but we also understand a lot of these are students in medical school. Some of them in their final year, some of them a few months from graduation. We've heard whispers of certain arrangements that the Ghana government is working on. Have any of them been completed with other countries where they can perhaps just write their completion exams and then move on from there?
Well, before I get to that, can I just add to what you said?
Okay.
In terms of the opportunity cost.
Yes, please.
Remember that the government cooperation is a major aspect of our global interaction. And the announcement by a number of our key partners in terms of the sizable investments that they are making into defense-related expenditure, because they think that there's a threat in the international environment, and nobody knows where what has happened is going to lead to. So many of our partners, and the government partners, are shifting or reallocating resources for defense. And I just want to stress that even the support that is being given to Ukraine and also to the millions of refugees that are being generated by this conflict means that there are less resources available for the kinds of development cooperation that potentially is necessary for us to transform our economy. So, we're going to have impacts both directly, as Theo said, but also in terms of the ability of countries to support others in their own objectives. But going back to the students. There are a number of discussions, especially in terms of inside Ghana itself. What could be done to ensure that these students do not lose academically. The question has been raised as to whether there could be some virtual programs with the parent universities and so on, which I don't know how that can be done, because these are institutions which are under bombardment and other forms of attack and disruption. So it seems to me that the most potentially viable would have to be with institutions in Ghana, and that issue has been brought to the attention of the appropriate authorities. I cannot say that we have a solution at this moment, but that is the direction that we're going.
There had also been a slight criticism of the speed of operations, and perhaps that's also due to the absence of Ghana from some of the from a full administrative presence, so to say, of Ghana from some of the countries who are helping us out. So maybe in Poland, in Hungary, in Moldova, in some of those other countries that mentioned. What lessons have we picked up with regards to what to do with our diplomatic efforts in these spaces?
Well, may I just say that, some of the criticisms, I think, misunderstand the situation. Yes, at the beginning of after the massing of troops along the borders of Ukraine, a number of Western countries shared intelligence as to what they thought was the intention of the Russian Federation, and then called on their citizens to leave. And Ghana also, at a certain point, advised our citizens to leave. But I should point out that, and the media would bear witness to this, everybody had their own views on whether the intelligence coming from the United States and others was genuine or not. In fact, there was an incident at the Defense Department in the United States where an American journalist was challenging the intelligence which was being reported by the spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Defense. The Russian Federation kept assuring the world. And remember that usually when the government speaks publicly, you have to give it the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. And the Russian Federation kept assuring the entire world that they had no intention of invading Ukraine. So the dynamic there did not indicate that you had to rush to get people out. And in fact, as you recall, they crossed the border whilst the Security Council was debating, its decision regarding the two breakaway republics. So in fact, almost everyone was overtaken by events. And again, we had appealed to the Russian Federation to resort to peaceful means. So, that was the environment within which they invaded Ukraine. Now, you would also recall that the French president, President Macron, has just called on his citizens to leave Russia after the discussion he had with President Putin. Now, what is the implication? Maybe France knows something. We don't know. So if something were to happen and we had to take out our citizens in an emergency from Russia, somebody could say, well, Macron had said to French citizens to leave Russia. But, do you know something about what is going to happen in the coming weeks in Russia? That might require that our citizens be out. So there's an element of imprecision, especially when you're getting formally and publicly assurances which are then in the end contradicted. So we cannot, the lesson that we can learn from Ukraine, and I know that our ability to move people out of Ukraine and what we've done. Remember that when we started bringing our citizens to Ghana, Ghana was the only African country to have done so. So we've done quite a remarkable job in terms of moving our people from different parts of Ukraine. And one of the key lessons from there is that working with the student leadership, both in Ukraine and in Ghana, working with the Pentecostal church, the civil society organizations, is fundamental because, as you said, our strength on the ground is very thin because, of course, we are a lower middle income country, and so we don't have the kinds of resources and capacities that the industrialized countries have. But working together, we've been able to ensure that we have the information and the database that enables us to identify where our nationals are and to be able to help bring them out. And I should conclude by saying that the friendly relations that we enjoy with countries has been enormously helpful. And so all the countries that border Ukraine and that agreed to receive our nationals and set aside their visa regimes and so on, that is because of the foreign policy of the country. And of course, even in terms of talking to Belarus and Russia, the kinds of things that we're seeing in terms of the humanitarian corridor has to be part of that diplomatic assets that we have based on our foreign policy direction.
All right, thank you very much, Ambassador Kwabena Osei Dankwa, Special Advisor to the Foreign Minister. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up the conversation with Dr. Alexandra Vutraves from the Global Studies Institute, University of Geneva. Welcome back. Final leg of the show. And Dr. Vutraves, so from where you sit, with all the engagements that are ongoing, we've had initial talks between the Ukrainian side and the Russian side. Demands have been made. The incursions are ongoing. The shelling is ongoing. Can you project how long Russia is willing to let this go on?
There's a fantastic book which I can only recommend to read, a book of 1995 by General Rupert Smith on the utility of war. And in this book, General Smith talks about something new in international affairs and in armed conflict that has never happened before in the many centuries of military history. And that is the fact that for the first time in history, you now have a different power play, a different dynamic of negotiation, because until now we've always had maybe two parties to a conflict, maybe three, maybe four, maybe six, maybe 16 parties to the conflict, but everybody wanted the same thing. Everybody wanted to win. Well, now in history, things are becoming more complicated because you have a certain number of parties to the conflict who are not interested in winning. And Vladimir Putin, in previous conflicts, let's talk about the situation in Georgia. Let's talk about the situation in Syria. Let's take the situation, you've mentioned Moldova and Transnistria before. All of these situations are unsettled. And essentially, the conflict is frozen, but there is no solution to the conflict. And we can multiply this with talking about Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina. We can multiply examples. So I'm not sure that the end game is really winning, but the end game is really trying to assert Russia back into international affairs, international relations, and essentially deterring NATO advances or the expansion, the continued expansion of NATO into certain countries such as Ukraine, such as Georgia, such as Central Asia. This is essentially the objective of the Russian president today.
What is your take on those who say it's all well and good to blame Russia, but they had been warning of dire consequences if this invitation that was being waved at countries around them did not stop from NATO countries, and that they had basically given 15 or 20 years worth of warning. And so people should not have been surprised by Russia's response to this.
Let me answer you. You mentioned that I was a colonel in the Swiss Armed Forces, and you know that Switzerland is a neutral country. And Switzerland joined in 1995 the Partnership for Peace program, which is a non-binding organization that was put in place by NATO for neutral countries and also for countries that have been let down and evacuated by Soviet and Russian occupation forces in the early 1990s when the Soviet Union ceased to exist. So what you said sounds very nice. It's a nice story to tell, but that's just simply not how it happened. And the way it happened was all of those countries that for about 50 years, half a century, had a protector in the form of the Soviet Union, which, by the way, was a protector in a very cynical sense because the Soviet Union essentially got a lot of money from this military occupation of these countries. Well, when the Soviet Union left, these countries knew one thing: they had to quickly and as quickly as possible step into the train of a military and political alliance. And the military alliance was NATO, and the political alliance was the European Union. And so I understand what you say. And as I said, it's a very nice story and it's very coherent. And if some of my master's students debated the issue in this way, I would say, fantastic. That's a very legitimate way of presenting things, but that's simply not how it happened. And take the neutral countries, take the countries that were former Warsaw Pact countries. Poland is an excellent example, but we could talk about Bulgaria, Romania, and so on and so forth. Well, what did these countries want? All of these countries wanted to join the European Union for economic and political stability, and they all wanted to join NATO for some kind of military security. The fact of the matter is, Russia has never provided military security to anyone. And number two, Russia is seen as a threat to many of these countries. And as I said, it's not about a story. It's not storytelling. That's simply the political choices that have been made by these countries in Central Europe.
So you don't think that it matters the positions, or, for want of a better word, the feelings of a country an economy the size of Russia matters in this regard. That, again, those who would say, again, permit me here, who would say the US won't allow this on their borders. So why should Russia allow it?
You mentioned something really fantastic. Once again, it's very nice to say the economic importance of Russia. What exactly is the economic importance of Russia? The GDP of Russia is just a little above the GDP of Portugal. So I think, the population of Russia is less than France and Germany combined. So let's look at some real facts. Now, Russia has a big stick. Russia has 6,000 and something nuclear weapons. Russia has 15,000 tanks and an army of close to 1 million men. And this is why people respect Russia today. But it's not because they're providing any kind of security to anyone. And it's definitely not because it's a peaceful nation or has been in the last 20 years.
Fantastic submission. Thank you very much for the clarification, Dr. Alexander Vutravers, ex-retired Lieutenant Colonel of the Swiss Army, but now teaching at the Global Studies Institute, the University of Geneva. He's also the editor-in-chief of the Revue Militaire Suisse. And also thank you very much, Ambassador Kwabena Osei-Dankwa. Also, a big thank you to Dr. Theo Chiampong and Samuel Bequin for joining us on the show today. I hope